My name is Anna. I want to tell you a story about my crazy half-brother Tom. More specifically, how he tried to get me out of the house. To begin with, I didn't find out about Tom's existence very long ago. In general, my father and I lived together. My mother and I were divorced a long time ago, and I don't even remember her. Dad worked and I went to school just like everyone else. But one day, people I didn't know came to our house. I didn't understand what it was at first. A woman with a teenage boy asked me to call my father. I immediately noticed that something was wrong with the kid. He kept looking at me from under his brows. You'd think he hated me, but why would he? We don't even know each other, I thought, and I was wrong. It turned out that this was my half-brother. This woman next to him, his mother. We share a father. Naturally, we were both taken aback by this news. At first, Dad didn't want to admit this fact. He even pretended that they had the wrong address. But the woman was persistent. It was simple. Dad had an affair a long time ago with a certain person, and that woman, when she got pregnant, didn't tell her father about it because he was missing. My father doubted if this was his son, but then he looked at the boy and the questions were settled. He was an exact copy of my late grandfather. Apart from the similarities in appearance with the same hateful look, a little withdrawn, unsociable, taciturn. These two did not think long and stayed temporarily to live with us. Oh, I didn't say. That woman demanded a large sum of money from father for the maintenance of her son. Otherwise, she promised to hire a lawyer and resolve the issue according to the law. Well, while Dad was looking for money, they decided to stay with us. It was the longest 3 weeks of my life. Not only did Miss Holt, Tom's mother, make a mess of the house, but her son continued to stare at me like a killer. At first, I had no idea what this guy was up to. But one morning when I woke up, I saw a note on my dresser in my room. It said, "You're not welcome in the house." I can't say that I was scared, but it was unpleasant, and I knew that Tom was. I crumpled the paper in my fist, stormed into his room, and threw it in his face. I yelled at him, told him it was my house, and let him remember it. At this moment, Miss Holt came in. She saw her son lying awake in bed, and I was yelling at him. Of course, she got it all wrong and threatened me. "If you touch him again, you'll have to deal with me," she told me. Oh, I was beside myself with anger. In the evening, I had a serious conversation with my father. He said that he was sorry about all this, but asked me to be patient for him and my mother. Then he promised to get my mother back, no matter what it took. But first I had to get the money for these two. I gathered my will and decided to be more restrained. The next day, when I got back from school, Tom was sitting in the kitchen having lunch. His mother was hanging around again. My half-brother was in his favorite position, staring at me from the corner of the table. I pretended not to notice him and sat down to eat. Suddenly, the phone rang. When I answered the phone, I went back to my seat and saw dead flies on my plate. I glared at Tom, and he just sat there and didn't even blink. Remembering my promise, I silently threw my lunch in the trash and went to my room. There was a fire burning inside me. I wanted to throw that plate in his face. And so it was every day. Tom was always coming up with something. He would throw my neighbor's dog's feces under the bathroom door, turn off the light in the toilet, and once even cut up my favorite sweatshirt. I held on, but with the last of my strength. I wasn't ready to give up and give him my seat. This was my home and my family, and I was determined to stand up to the end. About 2 weeks later, the little bastard had outperformed all his crazy antics. I once passed by his room. He was just not at home. And there I found a photo from my photo album. Everywhere on my face, eyes are cut out. My mouth, my face is baked with a pen. It was a nightmare. I went to deal with Miss Holt, but she wasn't there either. I know it's not good to go through other people's things, but in her purse, I found medical reports that Tom is suffering from a mental disorder. He's paranoid. That's why he's so unsociable and tried to hurt me in every way. He's just not healthy, I thought. I told my father, and he spoke to Miss Holt. It turns out that she was looking for money for her son's treatment. He is always afraid that he will be left alone, and therefore behaves like this. I know he's made trouble for Anna, but that's only because he thinks she's superior to him in everything. He's afraid I'll leave him and take her with me. It's my fault that he's like this." Miss Holt said to her father and began to cry. I overheard the conversation and felt sorry for him. My father said that if possible, he would help as much as he could. "After all, this is my son too, even though you hid this fact," he said. Dad was very worried about the upcoming conversation with me. He knew how hard the house had been for me lately. He asked me several times to forgive him for what happened, for the fact that I had to pay for his irresponsibility in my youth. Yes, I don't dispute it. I didn't like that everything in our house had changed and that we now had strangers living with us. But when I found out that Tom needed serious treatment, I felt sorry for him. At the same time, I saw how kind my father was. In general, the four of us have been living together ever since. Dad was actively involved in Tony's treatment. We didn't get along very well, but at least he stopped looking at me like a killer. And Miss Holt wasn't such a bitch.
Do you have a little brother or sister? How do you feel about them? Have you ever thought about what would happen if you were left alone without them? My name is Mark. I want to tell you about my sister, or rather, why I hated her. Usually when another child is born in the family, it is groomed and cherished the most. And all because he is small. He is the youngest in the family, and accordingly, he needs more attention than the others. For me, it turned out very differently. When I was born, I wasn't the best. I didn't have any privileges. I didn't get snickered at. I didn't get more toys, and I didn't get more pocket money than my sister. She was more loved than I was. I had the feeling that she was younger than I was, although the age difference is 5 years. My sister's name is Alice. No, she's a good person and sometimes a good sister. Sometimes when she was in a good mood, she would bring me home new toys, ice cream, or even give me money. But there were days when she looked awful and acted like a bitch. She could have thrown me out of the room and slammed the door in my face. I didn't understand why her parents didn't scold her at such times. Why did they punish me for any such outbursts? Was she on a special account? But why and how? I remember once I had a birthday, but my parents said that there was no money for the celebration, and I wanted this event so much. I waited a whole year to ask for a new skate as a gift. And then, such a bummer. Naturally, my mood fell. The next day passed as usual, and in the late afternoon, I noticed that my mother was packing a suitcase somewhere. When I asked where she was going, she said that she and Alice should go to another country, and then promised that they would return soon. What? Another country? But how? Why not me? Why her? Why does she always get the best of everything? So they don't have money for a new skate and cake, but they do have money to go to other countries? Why should I do all this? My heart was filled with hatred for Alice that night. I went to her bedroom, watched her pack her own things, and just silently hated her. I have often wondered why they should have another child if there is no place for it in their heart. This unloved, sometimes superfluous member of the family was me. As long as I can remember, I've been trying to figure out the secret of my sister's difference from me. And can everything be simpler? It's just that she's she and I'm I. This continued for several more years, and things got even worse. My parents almost stopped noticing me over the years. I was in the house like a shadow, and I had already learned not to talk to them much, and not to pay attention to the way they hung around this witch. I went to school, did my own homework, signed up for sports clubs, and made plans to get out of the house as soon as possible. Yes, I made a final decision for myself. They will be better off without me, or rather, they will not even notice my absence. I just needed to find a place to live and some part-time work for minors. I waited for the day when my mom and dad left on some business. They promised to return late at night. I picked up my duffel bag from under the bed and headed for the exit. As I was walking down the hall, Alice noticed me. "Hey Mark, where are you going?" she asked me. I was rude when I said it was none of her business. "What difference does it make? Do you care?" I shouted back. Alice made a surprised face, came up to me and asked why I was angry and rude to her. This question enraged me even more. I realized that the silence accumulated over the past months was about to tear me apart, and I gave in to emotions and I told my favorite parents everything I thought about my family. You ask why I'm angry? Because I don't exist in your fucking family. You live your own life. Parents have recently ceased to be interested in how I'm doing. You sit down to dinner separately, separate from me. When I get home, no one even yells, "Mark, hi, how you doing?" And no one asks me how I'm doing at school. Do any of you know that I'm captain of the high school basketball team? Did you know that I've been going to a music club for a year now and I've learned to play the guitar? Yes, I learned to cook food myself with the help of Google. And all because you are not near me. You then with your father, then with your mother, travel around the world, go to some countries and do not even tell where you rested? And I wasn't even taken once. And then you ask why I'm angry? Maybe because I'm not your family, I shouted. I was yelling so hard that I thought my lungs were going to explode from the strain. I blushed and my eyes were streaming with tears. The resentment I had accumulated over the years spoke to me. Alice just stood there looking at me and crying. She just said, "I'm sorry," in a low voice. "Is that all? I'm sorry?" I asked her. She roared louder than me, slammed the door to the room, and cried. I didn't know what was going on. It turns out that my parents were standing behind me. They looked very depressed. Mom was crying too, and then she and Dad took me to the kitchen. My father said they had a serious conversation for me. I was prepared to hear that I was not their own child, that they had taken me for a fool, and now they were sorry and I had to leave. "Your sister has cancer," my mother said. She wept even louder. Dad put his arm around her, but he didn't look up from the floor. At that moment, I felt sick. I was prepared for anything but this news. Suddenly, I felt hurt, ashamed, and angry at the same time. "She was diagnosed with the disease a couple months before you were born, and your dad and I threw all our energy into her treatment. Alice was looking forward to your birth. When you were in my tummy, she read you her favorite stories every day. In the countries we went to, she received chemotherapy, after which she was very ill for a while. She sometimes couldn't even walk on her own, so she often kept the door to her room closed or maliciously kicked you out. She just forbade us to tell you about it because she wanted you not to be sad," my mother said. Then she pointed out that she was very sorry for me because when they saved one child, they did not notice how they destroyed another, me. I don't think I felt any worse. You can't imagine how bad I felt at that moment. I thought of such terrible things. I hated Alice, and I did everything I could to offend her. I just looked at my parents and cried. My sister came up behind me and gave me a big hug. I couldn't say a word. She calmed me down and said it was all her own fault. "I still love you, you stupid boy," she said, and laughed. That night, for the first time in my life, I had such a long, open, honest, and frank conversation. All I asked was that you let me take care of her. Now, in all her chemo sessions, I was there for her, feeding her, reading her books, playing the guitar, singing songs. A few more years passed. Alice still has to undergo intensive treatment, but I'm happier than ever because I can be near my sister, whom I love more than anyone in the world.